I became aware from several sources that I failed to introduce myself last time, and I also failed to introduce our two trainers properly. So I'd like to remedy that. Marlene and I'm Reverend Margaret Morrison. I think everybody in the room knows Marlene. Michelle from the bakery, McIsaac, and Marlene and I got money from a grant from the Deanery of Muskoka, and we decided, well, we got the grant for this express purpose. So we're very grateful to the Deanery of Muskoka for enabling this. And we then had a meeting and we thought, what will we do? We don't know nearly enough to do anything by ourselves. And I tell you, my God was on my side because we came up and got to meet Michelle, Jessen, and Denyse Kelly. And they have been God's gift to the three of us. We met for lunch, and I thought we were going to be there all afternoon. And finally, Michelle said, "Oh, I think we have to go." But it's been that kind of relationship. They are amazing people. And Marlene and I and Michelle, she was going to try and come tonight. I went to visit her, and she has 5 steps up into her house. And I said, "What did you plan to do about those?" She said, "Well, I thought I'd try my cane." So she won't be here tonight. Maybe next week. She's very disappointed. But she got the surgical date, and you know how hard they are to get, so she went ahead with it. So I'd like to begin with a very short prayer, please. Most loving and gracious God, thank you so very much for all the attentiveness, the interest, the caring that have been demonstrated in this group. Thank you for the atmosphere that Denyse and Michelle have created so that people feel free to share. We pray, dear Lord, that our hearts will be open. We will accept the truth, and we will see our own roles in reconciliation. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. The floor is yours, my dear ladies. I thought you were going to say no.
Teaching message, thank you. Blessings to you all. What you see here in front of you, today I decorated in honor of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. Their emblem is the red dress. And so that's why you see the red dresses. And then again, there's the grizzly bear, because bear medicine. Inside the area as well as over here is the medicine of healing. And that's why we are all here. So in beauty and in balance, I want to say an opening prayer. And I would like to thank Father Sky for not inundating us with rain and sleet and snow so that our travel here is safe to come and also hopefully safe to go back home. And I want to send greetings and gratitude to Grandfather Sun and Grandmother Moon, who have been hiding their faces in the clouds today, but we all know that they are there and we can feel that energy. And last time we spoke about medicine being energy. So there is energy that you can take medicine. And in beauty and in balance, and in much reverence, I want to send greetings, gratitude, and my devotion to our Mother Earth, that is home to all of us, and that is very much alive beneath this here concrete and pavement. And let us all please step lightly upon her back so that she can breathe a bit easier. And I want to send greetings and gratitude to all those beings with whom we do share our beautiful Earth Mother. All the winged ones, all the swimming ones, live in the water, all the standing green people, the trees, all the green and growing ones, the plants, and all the healing ones, medicine, sage, cedar, sweetgrass, chamomile tea for me, and for me, peppermint. Thank you for all the healers and all the green and standing ones. Thank you also for our four-legged brothers and sisters. Thank you, greetings to all human beings that live upon Mother Earth, here on beautiful Turtle Island and everywhere else. Special thank you to all indigenous people everywhere, and especially to the indigenous nations upon Turtle Island. Our First Nations, our Inuit and Métis. We are thankful for their resilience and endurance. 488 years. And still, they kept their languages, their cultures, their wisdom. And still, today, more than ever, they are stewards of this land, its waters, and its earth. And I want to say greetings and gratitude to everyone in Basel and everyone here. Basel is a part of Treaty 61, the traditional homeland of the Anishinaabe, and very special greetings and gratitudes go to them. May all be well with everyone alive today. May there be no harm coming to anyone. May we all grow and today continue to become teachers for our communities and for future generations, so we can all walk in beauty and balance and in harmony.
Michelle, who's a walking encyclopedia, I will have my book with me today to keep me, I tend to forget things when I get nervous, so. I'm gonna go over a little bit of the smudging because there are some new faces today. Sage is one of the 4 major medicines Michelle had mentioned, the sweetgrass, cedar, sage, and tobacco. So when we smudge, it is to clear negativity and to bring in the positive. So as we smudge, I will wash my hands, to cleanse them. I will bring it over my head. I'm cleansing my mind of negativity and bringing in positivity. My eyes, so that I, clear the negativity and I see positivity in people. My mouth, so that I speak kind words, I speak the truth. And I'm honest and caring words to other people. And my heart, to cleanse resentment and to open to compassion and caring for others. So I'm going to start the smudge, and again, try not to set off the smoke detectors. Did you let me know again this week? Because smudging, just so you know, we start ending with the smudging. The other thing is the smudging, it kind of brings us all together. Like when when Margaret said the prayer, it's to bring us like-minded so that we're all in a positive frame of mind and we're all ready to listen and hear. Tonight is also going to be a hard night of some of the stuff that Michelle has to say. And one small personal note, this smudge is also dedicated to a very dear friend of mine who provides me with all my medicines, who passed this week. So I will start the sage smudge. Did you want to do another song while we're doing that? No, it's okay.
Last week we had questions about women medicine and why sage is women medicine, and I just thought I explained very quickly that sage has phytoestrogens and they help women when they go through the change. child matters. This is a lullaby for all those that mattered so much and that didn't come home. This is a lullaby for the child that lives in our hearts, the child that we still are and always will be. The child that is open to learn and to grow. Nina, Nina, Ia. Nina, Nina, Ia. Nina, Nina, Ia. Nina, Nina, Denyse mentioned housekeeping. We have brought a whole table full of things for you guys to look at. Some of it is real, and you can touch it. And you can investigate it a little bit. Find out. Some of it, however, is fake. And if you know that the Indians these days have Indians that make Indian items in India, well, you will learn about that. We also ask that people maybe turn down their ringing bells of their what is it, technologies, I always say, phones and stuff, so that, you know, if you forgot to turn on the potatoes at home, that doesn't break apart the circle. I am a lazy person. I'm like Coyote or like Nanambodo, who is lazy and doesn't want to do anything and doesn't want to teach either. And so, you know, likes to lay around and sleep and eat a lot. And so today I decided I'm not gonna teach. I will make you all teach each other. For that nasty purpose, I got a whole bunch of paper. I will pass them around, and then we can go around the circle. Everyone reads one. Those of you who, I put it rather big, so I hope that everybody can read what I put out here. After we did that, I think I may want to do a little prayer to close off what we heard and what we learned. And then we have a little break so that we can go look at the books are different today and all the stuff is out there, and then we can move around a bit. And then Denyse is gonna talk a couple of sentences about the Indian Act. And then we will go into what that meant and how that worked. And, especially how hard it was for women. And then we may talk a little bit about what is happening these days with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, with the missing and murdered women, and with what was enfranchisement and this kind of stuff, so at least you know what's going on. And then we will have an open forum. And I really would like to know if you guys knew any of this, what we will go through today. So, here, I will read number one because Coyote may be lazy, but Coyote also have to do something. So, 2, 3, I have about, 25, something like that. Some of you guys get off easy, others, you are sunk. Okay. But you are one of the sunkier person because this is big. You get off really easy, and you have to really present this one. There you go, 1689. Luckily, I was around here. This one was short. And you get bitten by a wolf, you get a big one. Okay. 1825. 1827. What's this? 1833. 18, I don't know if that's something to say in the future because none of these are very good. You'll be sorry. Okay, here, this is something I'm so glad we have this one. And then this one here. Oh, you have a very poignant one. It's also short, so that's a good one. 26. I think I have to read this because this sucks. My printer died on me, so I think I have to. You have. It's really bad. I read that one because I basically know what it's all about. Public interest. First, Indian rights. Second, I bummer. Margaret, you are stuck with this one. This one here, Indian affairs, I don't know, this one is too long. I have to read this one. You wanted to do the OPA crisis, here you go. And then the missing and murder. Every day we can make this. We can do this afterwards. So, we all talked about good old Columbus, right? What did he do?
Lost on his way to India.
Yes. And we also talked about that he killed about 3 million Tainos, right? himself personally, and there is some markers in the book that has talked about Columbus that explains the whole thing. And if you read it tonight, you won't be able to sleep. So, but now we have Jacques Cartier, and guess what?
Oh, he got lost on his way to India too.
Yes,
Yes.
right.
Sorry, lost in the line.
Okay, on April 20th, 1534, Jacques Cartier received a commission from Francis I of France to go and discover a way to India and its spices, as well as to discover and secure great quantities of gold and precious things like rubies for France. Cartier somehow got a couple of boats and a couple of people and a couple of cows, and he came over here. Cartier called this new world up, he came up the St. Lawrence River and he called it the land God gave Cain. Cain is not a nice person in your belief system, right? A bummer. At first he was convinced he had reached India. Did he?
No, he got lost.
Then he encountered the Algonquin people and proceeded to capture their leader Donnacona and his sons in a native village, which is now known as Quebec City. Donnacona's people have a name for this land, Kanata. Kanata. Cartier assembled great quantities of precious things and filled his ship with them for the return trip to France. Boxes and boxes and boxes and boxes full of quartz crystals and what turned out to be mica. Francis was pooped when he saw that. The native leader, Donnacona, and his sons died in France. Cartier returned several times to Kanata, looking for the fabled treasures of the mysterious Saguenay River. Did your grandfather read that?
1622, Champlain persuades the Montagnais people to hunt and trap other native men and women so as to work the appropriated land for France and his own self-appropriated holdings. Number 3.
1627, the Jesuits are instructed by the current Pope to hunt down and subdue the Huguenots over in Europe. This edict is interpreted as an order to also hunt down other non-Catholics worldwide, equals native people because they are engaged in devil worship, as evident by their garb, drum, songs, and goings on.
1628, the Pope grants all land from Florida west and north to the Arctic to France. King Louis XIII of France and his Cardinal Richelieu approve a company of 100 strong men to establish France's Catholic Empire in North America.
1636 to 1637, a large, devastating influenza epidemic wipes out 50 to 80% of all native peoples of New France. Huron Sachems, faith keepers, think the witchcraft of Jesuit priests who were going around baptizing the almost dead and dying is to blame for this malaise.
1639, a smallpox outbreak kills a large portion of the survivors in the St. Lawrence River Valley and many other natives, as well as the boatload of settlers who brought it into the country.
1639, The Pope calls for urgent Christianization of the savages and an end to their practices and way of life. The whole plethora of different Christian orders are given permission to establish themselves in New France and convert or vanquish.
1647, a newly established sovereign council is ordered to establish law and order in New France. And now, all Jesuit priests, governors of any Christian order, any army general, fleet captain, lead fur trader, and secretaries of the king are now notary publics and can dole out laws and punishments as they see fit. Many of these laws chased native people from their lands and houses and gardens and awarded these to settlers for money. First Nations rebelled against these self-serving tactics to no avail. They were hung.
1659, fur traders encounter the first Lakota Sioux. No idea if the fur traders survived it.
1670, the Company of Adventurers is established in London by King Charles II. He gives all the lands that drain into Hudson Bay into their hands. It is called Rupert's Land, and the company is later known as the Hudson's Bay Company. Gossip travels in fast moccasins, and quickly French priests claim all land around the Great Lakes for France. Never mind the First Nations that lived there. These tribes were not living in permanent settlements, had summer and winter camps, and fish and hunt camps. Since they were moving around, the land was seen as terra nullius, unoccupied and ripe for the taking.
1689, King Louis XIV allows his subjects to import slaves from Africa to the colonies of New France, especially because Indians are unsuitable to be slaves. They rather die than work, and beating them does not help the matter. Exceptions are the colonies of the U.S., but sadly they quickly die of diseases while here.
1763, Treaty of Paris. Canada falls to the English. Limited freedom of worship for white settlers, not for Indians. No Jews allowed.
1781, a new strain of smallpox is brought in and kills up to 90% of the Ojibwa, Cree, and other northern tribes.
1792 to 1797. After constitutional divide of Canada into Upper Canada, which is Ontario, and Lower Canada, which is Quebec, and Rupert's Land, free crown land is given out to settlers and deserving that pledge allegiance to the king. Indigenous inhabitants are driven off this free land. The homeland of the Wendat people around Lake Simcoe is taken away and sold to settlers. Native dwellings are burned, and the settlers harvest the fields and gardens for themselves. York is the capital of Upper Canada. Natives now realize that the treaties they made with the settlers are land grabs and took away all their hunting and fishing grounds, as well as the land their villages stood on.
1825, settlers can order a booklet that gives them advice on how to swindle their native neighbors out of their private land or valuable goods. It involves copious amounts of alcohol.
1827, Americans can now become Canadian citizens. Native Canadians cannot. They are seen as unemancipated wards of the crown and have no rights.
1830, a new Indian Problem Department, Indian Affairs, is established. It decides on keeping Indians in reservations without permission to leave, and is given the mandate to civilize the Indians and force them into agriculture and Christianity.
1838, a nasty outbreak of smallpox rages in Fort Howard. There is, however, a new vaccine, and the natives are given it. The white settlers in the area protest vehemently until they're told this new vaccine is being tested on the Assiniboine blood and Blackfoot. When it's found to be safe and effective, the settlers will get theirs.
1842, legislature inaugurates the Indian Act, and the first commissioner of Indian Affairs is in charge of it. We will hear more about that dreaded document. 1862, once again, smallpox devastate Vancouver Island's natives and quickly spreads north, killing thousands and emptying villages.
1869, Indian enfranchisement is proclaimed. A smallpox outbreak happens on the plains, which kills thousands. 1870, Manitoba joins Canada. 1871, BC joins Canada. Natives have no say and no rights.
1872, Indian Act enables the sale of native reservation land, 160 acres for $10, with the stipulation that settlers have to establish a homestead.
The Indian Act declares all Indians wards of the government and take away all control over reservation land for the tribes. It also enforces enfranchisement and curtails the rights of Native women. Denyse will later speak to this. They could never understand why the white man speaks with a forked tongue.
This is a newspaper article from the Fort Walsh Northwest Territories, December 8, 1882. The last major Canadian Plains Indian chief outside of the treaty system finally adhered to Treaty Number 6 today. Starvation has brought Big Bear and his band to the Treaty Council fire. Just recently, Dr. Augustus Jakes, the Northwest MP physician, visited Cree camps, with big bears included around Fort Walsh. He reports they are literally in a starving condition and destitute of the commonest necessaries of life. The disappearance of the buffalo has left them not only without food, but also without robes, moccasins, and adequate tents or teepees. Their clothing, for the most part, was miserable and scanty in the extreme. I saw little children at this inclement season, snow having fallen, who had scarcely rags to cover them, or food they possessed was little or none. Big Bear, in effect, had to sign in order to become eligible for government rations. If he did not, the 57-year-old chief and his band would starve to death over the coming winter.
(1884) Potlatch ceremonies are banned and pressure of clergymen and missionaries. Government agents take away masks and blankets and other devil worship tools and burn them. Métis people get cheated out of their lands in Manitoba on grounds that they are not settled year-round, but roam to hunt and fish.
November 22, 1885, Manitoba, the execution of Louis Riel.
(1889), only 6 buffaloes were left in the prairies. Bears, pronghorns, and elk were near extinction. Passenger pigeons were gone, so were whooping cranes and sandhill cranes and Canada geese. Is that true? The game was hunted out by professional hunters that sent it east on the new railroad to feed Montreal and Toronto.
1907. All the game was hunted out by professional hunters. Famine on the prairies. All the cattle die in a row of very cold winters. Immigrants die in Winnipeg and other train stations on their way west as they have no food and no shelter. Every morning a cart comes by to collect the dead.
January 29th, 1907, Lethbridge Daily News. Cattle are starving to death. Lethbridge, Alberta. The heyday of the large cattle ranches is over. A development brought about by natural tragedy. Thousands of steers and cows have been starving to death as the blizzard swept southern Alberta. Very few ranchers will escape the large losses this winter. It's the worst in 20 years. Last week, some 10,000 cattle stampeded through Lethbridge, seeking food and shelter from the wind and from the snow. Houses, stores, and barns were damaged before the animals could be driven out onto the range. Now it is learned that 6,000 starving cattle have invaded McLeod, causing widespread damage before the cowboys managed to drive them out. The cattle industry here has flourished for two reasons. The first being the generous treatment that afforded investors in the ranching business. They were given control of large tracts of Native American land by the government. And they were well protected. Until recently, some policies slowed down their doings and increased the flow of settlers. The policies now changed. A second reason is the climate. Southern Alberta has relatively low, mild winters, and snow is usually melted by Chinook's warm winds. This means, however, that there is some winter grass, and some ranchers can leave their cattle out in the winter to forage for themselves. In fact, some ranchers do not even put up any hay for their cattle. It is this trust in the winter that will cost the ranchers dearly. For the poor starving cattle, it means a painful death in the gullies along the railway tracks as they huddle and escape the ongoing blizzards.
(1907). Good news for a change. Onondaga native Tom Longboat from Bradford, Ontario, wins the Boston Marathon. The Canadian government buys a herd of 400 buffalo from a Métis farmer in Montana and ships them to a park near Edmonton to be set free and multiplied.
June 15, 1910, Gletchen, Alberta. The Blackfoot tribe, in a tight 69-64 vote, decided today to sell nearly half of its reserve. The vote fulfills Indian Act requirements which say a land surrender must secure the consent of a majority of the adult males living on the reserve. Those Blackfoot in favor of the surrender apparently have accepted Indian Department arguments that the Indians must sell land to finance new farming operations. With cash in hand, they could obtain houses and barns like the settlers and buy good horses and wagons. The sale would also ensure that each band member got improved rations. As one pro-sale Blackfoot said, selling land means we shall have farmland and money and will live good. Indian Department officials are anxious to free up more land for settlement, as hundreds of thousands of immigrants have come to the Northwest over the last decade, and good land is at a premium. At the same time, the Blackfoot population continues to decline, and in fact, it has fallen from more than 2,000 in 1877 to about 800. Once the surrendered lands are sold to settlers, it is believed that the Blackfoot will become the richest Indian land in Canada.
Public interest first, Indian rights second. May 1911, Ottawa. Parliament has once again drastically reduced the rights of Canadian Indians in a new amendment to the Indian Act. Under Section 49A of the Act, the Government of Canada can approve the expropriation of any Indian reserve near a town or city of 8,000 or more inhabitants, regardless of any previous treaty or written agreement. The expropriation is subject only to judicial review by the Exchequer Court of Canada. Reserves the legislation may affect include the Chippewa, Ojibwa Reserve at Sarnia, and the Caughnawaga Reserve near Montreal. As Calgary expands, the eastern section of the Sarcee Reserve may be in question. Frank Oliver, the Liberal Minister of the Interior, says that reserves blocking urban growth must be eliminated, as Indian rights must give way to the public interest.
1912, Quebec City, led by the Geographical Commission of Quebec. The campaign has begun to wipe out North American Indian names from Quebec maps. The urgency arises from the fear that visitors to the province obtain from these names the impression that Quebec is populated primarily by Indians. 4 years ago, Eugene Rouillard, the Secretary of the Geographical Society of Quebec, initiated debate on the subject when he suggested Quebec, an essentially French province, was saturated with Indian geographical names.
My Mohawk sucks. What's the name? Can you say that name again? Kanasatake. Okay. So the Oka crisis in 1990, also known as the Kanasatake. I can never say that. Thank you. I speak Anishinaabe, not Mohawk. Resistance was a land dispute between a group of Mohawk people and the town of Oka, Quebec, Canada. It began on July 11th, 1990 and lasted 78 days until September 26, 1990, and was sparked by the proposed expansion of a golf course and the development of townhouses on land disputed in the Pines. And that was just a big group of pines that included a Mohawk burial ground. Tensions were high, particularly after the death of Corporal Marceau Lemay, a Sûreté du Québec police officer. Finally, after 78 days, the crisis came to an end, leaving a provincial police officer dead and hundreds of Mohawk civilians injured. The events led to the creation of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, tasked with deepening consultation and cooperation between First Nations and governments across Canada. Just a little side note, a dear friend of mine that I met through the Healing Lodge, she was there for the Oka crisis. She was a child. Her father was a police chief at the time. They peppered sprayed children. I just wanted to throw that, like, they were terrified. And she was terrified for her dad, so the kids would come out where they shouldn't because they were terrified for the adults who were all out at the front. And, you know, as she put it, all because they didn't want their great-grandmother's grave disturbed. So just think about it, like our churches and our graves, they're sacred. We go there and we, you know, sit with our elders, and that's all they wanted, was to keep there. And so, yeah, they pepper sprayed, rubber pellets, the kids as well as adults. It didn't matter who was standing there. If they were on the front line, it was free target. Sorry, I got a little choked up. She was really emotional telling me about this.
I have to go. I left out 100 years of atrocities because I think after all this we had about enough. You guys lived in this last century. You guys all know what happened. Or maybe you didn't. Because where do we get our information from?
Schools.
Schools, yeah. Did they tell you any of this?
No.
Who learned any of this in school? Newspapers? Did you read any of this in newspapers? No wonder, because if a reporter went out and he put a story like this one or like that one out, the newspaper owner would say, we can't print this. We will lose revenue from advertisement. And then the police is not going to talk to us anymore. If we talk about somebody murdered this native woman, she probably got drunk and ran away. And so we are not going to print this. So the whole thing went underground. It is really difficult to find authentic, true-speaking stories after 1915. It got drowned out, of course, by World War I. And you have something about World War I, right?
Yeah, but just a short note. In spite of all the atrocities committed against them, native men enlisted to fight for Canada in World War I.
So I have something here that is a mile a minute long. It's about October 1913. It was one of the last ones, and it shows the sentiment of everybody at the turn of the century. Duncan Temple Scott, a prominent figure of Canadian literary circles, as both a poet and an editor, has been named Superintendent General of Indian Affairs by Prime Minister Robert Borden's Conservative government. Insiders are hardly surprised by the appointment. Scott first began working for the Indian branch in 1879 and has steadily risen through the department's ranks. He is known as being ruthless. Scott is a staunch imperialist. With regard to Canada's past, he considered all its life flowed either from the Old World or from New England. All life flows either from the Old World, meaning England and France and Germany, or from New England, where the white settlers lived. Within this context, he believes strongly in assimilation, that Indians should be absorbed into white society and civilized. In official reports, he has denounced their traditional ways of life, and in several of his poems, the only good Indian is a Christian Indian or a dead Indian. Duncan Campbell Scott. You have something?
1995, the Ipperwash crisis was a dispute over Indigenous land that took place in Ipperwash Provincial Park, Ontario in 1995. Several members of the Stony Point Ojibwe band occupied the park to assert claim to the nearby land which had been expropriated from them during the Second World War. It resulted in the death of Anthony Dudley George, an Ojibwe protester who was shot dead by an Ontario provincial police officer.
So since as far back as we can, has been noted in the mid-1970s, police have picked up Indigenous men and women and then left them miles outside the city on sub-zero winter nights. This was called Starlight Tours. While the practice was well known within the Indigenous communities, in Saskatchewan it gained widespread notoriety after two Saskatoon men froze to death in 2000, and a third man reported that he barely survived being left by police by the same power plant. As recently as 2018, Indigenous men have continued to claim that Saskatoon police still engage in taking them on these deadly Starlight tours. In 2003, Police Chief Russell Sabot admitted that there was a possibility that the force has been dumping First Nations peoples outside the city for years. And if anybody knows much about Saskatoon and Saskatchewan, my husband and I went to Moose Jaw just once. And literally, you get out of the car, and if you breathe, you can't see. We opened our hotel room, and it was so cold that it was like a cloud of smoke.
Ice fall.
Yeah. And as of 2021, despite convictions for related offenses, no Saskatoon police officer has been convicted specifically for having caused freezing deaths. So just a little something to add to that one. I don't think you've got the rest of them.
Today, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The organization Sisters in Spirit collected details of almost 600 cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada, including some historical cases that were not accepted by the police and cases that the police closed the book on after a woman's death, despite lingering questions from family members. MMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, is a movement that advocates for the end of violence against Native women. It also seeks to draw attention to the high rates of disappearances and murders of Native people, particularly women and girls. Its logo is the red dress. You also wear 3 red dresses today. Should we go next?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, these were made for me, actually. They were a gift.
So, guys, when we read all this, what do you think? What did you know?
The Oka?
And then I heard about all Indians being killed and stuff, but I didn't know anything about it.
Which is interesting because we all know about, the killing of the Jews in Europe, but we don't know about what's happening in our own backyard. And that was something that really struck and bothered me too when I started learning my heritage, is how much I knew about everybody else's, but I didn't know about my own.
I think it is also a problem of the self-picture that Canada has of itself. That nobody really wants to look at this. You guys are all very, very, very brave to be here and come and look at this. Because we have to change that self-picture a little bit, because all these atrocities have totally ripped apart any trust that First Nations people have in any government system here in Canada. And that is a big problem. All these atrocities, they have, of course, caused stress and trauma. But stress and trauma goes into the body. Modern science calls it epigenetics. I'm a survivor of torture by Christian priests that would go into my epigenetic makeup. If I would have had kids with him, they would carry that marker. They would carry the marker that as a 12-year-old, I only weighed 38 pounds or 38 kilos because I was starved. I was a walking skeleton. I didn't get any food because I wasn't so willing to become Christian. I will talk about that a little bit next time when we talk about residential schools. But all the epigenetic, the stress, the horror, the trauma that went through generation and generation and generation is still in the native kids today because it's given to them by mothers that survived through that. All our First Nations survivor, that's where the mistrust comes from. So we can't just walk on because that's the first reaction you see. And also the starvation and the hunger makes a person, the person of the next generation overeat. And it's a marker for getting diabetes. This is modern science that nobody knew 50 years ago. But now we see the outcome. And it is very, very hard. And for us, it is the question, what are we as a country, as a culture, what are we all together doing now to fix this? And that's why it is not easy. Does anybody have something that they would like to speak?
Just one thing to add to that. And I think by listening to this, that maybe, I mean, for me personally, my hope is that maybe you'll understand the next time you meet an Indigenous person who, you know, is angry and, because we come to the table with everything that's happened to us in our past, and then it's like, well, that happened before, so let's move on. Well, it's hard to move on until you've dealt with this. It's, like if your husband beats you, you can't just move on and just say, okay, from now on it's going to be better. You've got to heal that trust first. And I guess I'm hoping that by, talking about all this, although it's heavy, maybe then we can all understand each other and where we're coming from.
I've always thought it was amazing that so many people in my world would say things like, still say things like, okay, it was all wrong, but why don't they get over it? But when you look at somebody whose generations in the past came from Scotland, just as an example, they are quite proud of what they still have inside them 2 or 3 generations later. But they don't apply that same logic to what happened to our Indigenous people and what still exists in their hearts, their minds, their neurology. It is an ongoing, current example of a lack of respect for Indigenous people, I think.
Native kids are born with PTSD, face it, because of what happened to their mothers and grandmothers. And you raise Native kids born with syndromes and symptoms. And not yours, but you work with CSF. No,
okay.
And
yeah. Well, I mean, Mary Shirley could probably speak to a lot of the trauma and how if the mother has not received or the father has not received, healing of their own trauma, that effect it takes on the kids. I don't know if you want to say anything on that.
I can't say it any better than that. It is factually true.
Yeah, it helps us that you say that, because then it's not just scruffy little Michelle and Denyse claiming something. Because this is science, right? This is science we didn't know. When I was a young nurse, we didn't know that. But now we know. And now we know why the healing is so different. Because you're fighting against epigenetics.
When you're fighting against, I mean, you certainly, epigenetics certainly is present for sure. You're also, I don't know, fighting against, but you're also, as the person who experienced the trauma, your brain is wired to trigger you, to signal you in particular ways that are different from the way a brain is wired in someone who did not experience trauma. And those ways of being triggered, they have all kinds of consequences for how your behavior looks, how you sound, what you can hear, I mean literally, what you can hear even.
How you parent.
Yeah, well, and absolutely how you parent.
Yes. And then add to that the coping mechanisms that you use to try and deal with it when people are saying things to you like, get over it by now, you should be over it by now. So then you think you're crazy, and then, you know, your coping mechanisms, whether they be drinking or whatnot, and what effect that has. Like my daughter has fetal alcohol, and so, you know,
It's your adopted daughter.
Yes, my adopted daughter, thank you. But she's 25 right now, and probably has the mental capacity of, you know what, 10 to 12-year-old? And, you know, I was told she'd be in jail or pregnant by, you know, by 14. She's not in jail, she's not pregnant. I'm so proud of her. But her life is a struggle every day. And that's now. And that's because her mom was molested, you know, and her grandmother. And if you look back, generation and generation, it's just horrendous what went down the line. And thus I have this poor child who, not a child anymore, but every day is a struggle for her. And it's not her fault.
Which doesn't make her less accountable, but it does mean, from my perspective, it does mean that the kinds of healing she needs is very different and needs to be tailored to both the fetal alcohol, like the physiological stuff, but also the trauma stuff.
And we think by taking them out of an abusive home and putting them in a safe environment doesn't make it go away. Like, she craved knowing her family. And, you know, I drove them to visit their biological family. We met in a mall to keep it safe. And yet still, you know, they'd get online at school and she was talking to the uncle who sexually molested her aunt, her mother, and you know, because there's that biological need to know where you come from and who you are, even if you know you are safe.
Who do you belong to?
Yeah.
It's 488 years of this. Every Native person that you meet is a survivor of 488 years here in Canada. And you guys know what? Canada is doing a heck of a lot better than the US. Nobody here is a fundamental Christian that believes that only white people are supposed to, you know, rule the world, and anybody else is not really a human being but an animal. But when we go traveling, we meet them, you know, and it's scary. So we see on the one side, I see what happened. And you guys didn't know because nobody wanted you to know, because I think who would have spoken up if we had known? Who would have said something? I would for sure have said something, would you? Would you have done that, spoken up? I think most
But it's
of
not so easy, as you had mentioned last week. There were repercussions for speaking up too, right? So you speak up and then, you know, your land is taken or your whatever. I mean, not so much now, but there were reasons for not speaking up in the past also.
I think there were also other compounding effects, like when you talk about the influenzas that went around, scarlet fever and everything. We've all been through COVID, so if you can imagine that. And then also just the general climate. And the fact that people were all people were starving to death. Like, I mean, it was just a building.
Yes.
And in those days, you said, like, would you speak up? I think maybe if you were just trying to survive yourself, like, I mean, you didn't want to speak up because you couldn't even survive yourself.
Exactly. And I think that is important to know that once all the food was hunted out of this continent, everybody starved. There was nothing here, and then we had a couple of shitty winters and all them cows died, and then there was absolutely nothing here. And then there was the 1920s and the Death Bowl and you know, the depression, and everybody suffered. Somehow you guys also got through that. You were kids, or you know, your grandkids of survivors of all of this. And so, I mean, we have to somehow find a way to move on. So when we see what happened what was being done to the First Nations, in the mirror of what happened to the rest of Canada and what happened to the rest of the world, it sets it into relation. And then we know that, you know, nobody that is sitting in these chairs here today is to be blamed for anything. But we have to be aware that that happened and that there are horrendous wounds out there. And if you look at what's happening, at the resistance and everything that some Native people have, and at the daily fights that they scream for clean water up north, it's not just that they are pissed off what comes out of the faucet and that you can't drink it. No, it is the accumulated 488 years.
Some of that is the problem too. I mean, some of the waters up there is toxic. They can't bathe in it.
Yeah.
They have to go get bottled water just to survive, and everything that goes up there is hundreds of dollars, because Pewanik, I had a child in my home from Pewanik, it's all fly-in. So if you want to put something on a plane and fly it in, or Moosonee Moose factory, that train, I know it costs you $100 to put a suitcase on it, so Lord knows what it costs you to, you know, to bring that stuff up there. So, sorry, that's
1
aside.
liter of milk in Grise Fjord is $19.25 last week. No idea how much it is today. So people are still in poverty and in shacks. When the Sedna de Gagnon comes up to Grise Fjord, for example, which is one of our northernmost Inuit communities, she brings everything, every nail clipper, every power plant, every tennis ball for the community center. Everything comes on the sea lift. But the native people ask, where's the money coming from? Where does all the money go that the First Nations get? Yeah, well, Grise Fjord Reserve has to pay for that. You know, and of course there is here and there maybe a pocket that's a bit deeper and a couple of coins go in there, because we are all human, but how expensive it is to live in these villages. And there is no work up there, because native people were not supposed to work and have a business. That is all made possible very, very recently because the bloody Indian Act we are going to talk
Yeah, I
about
was just
later,
gonna say that's
it
part of it.
prohibits people to work. And you can't go hunting as a native person either. You can't even leave the reserve. And that is the problem. And now, you know, the act got amended and amended and amended and amended, and now it's still there, it's a bit better. There is so much room for improvement, and all of you have to push for that improvement.
And it's not just a matter of free will, you know, and move. Because how do you move when it's going to cost you $100 per suitcase to move? Sorry, sir.
And just getting back to what we knew in education, I mean, in my town, there was some teaching in school about the moral ambiguity of forced conversion. I remember in grade 5, we heard about treaty abrogations and atrocities between grade 5 and grade 8. Certainly, we heard about it, but the media, most of, Westerns, often the Indians are the bad guys, with the circle of the wagons and all that, unless you're talking about Ben Cartwright, come on, Bonanza, who was on good terms with everybody, it seemed. But in my town, Coburg, none of it made sense because the kids in Alderville, the reserve, went to the same high school, we all knew each other, and the impression was one of relatively good relations. And so the history didn't seem to match what I was experiencing. Mind you, very few indigenous people in Coburg, a few. And we have roots up north too, where there were many more. But also, we think of we thought, even though my family didn't vote for Liberals in '68, we thought of ourselves as good and our church as good, and it just didn't make sense. We didn't connect atrocities with policy, government, because of the idea of Western progress. Like that was so important to the development of what we saw as Canada, even the idea of 2 founding nations without thinking about First Nations. And so that, and then in 1990, I do know that people started to think, partly because the whole world sent reporters to Oka, and everybody was saying, what's going on in Canada? And why it took so long to sort of finally understand some of this that's hard to understand. Why it took hundreds of years.
Because it was told to us that it was in the past. 1990 for the last, residential school was shut down. That's not that long ago.
No.
But that was my understanding when I was younger. That was, that was bad. Anyways, you did say you want to take a break, and I'm just going at almost 8 o'clock.
Today I cry. Today I cry for the little boy that wakes up after the fever in his lodge and he calls for his mother. There's no answer. Today I cry for the little boy who finds his family in the cold lodge, all dead from the fever, brought in by blankets. Today I cry for the young woman who survived that fever, finding her little baby, dead and cold in her arms. And the medicine people and healers and the lodge next door, gone to the spirit world. Today, I cry for the villages burned, for the harvest taken. Today, I cry for the little kids brought to strange houses. Starving, having to listen to strange people in a strange language and strange ways of being. They didn't understand. Today I cry for the newcomers, Christian newcomers, who professed to follow a young man and his 12 disciples. A young man who, on the mount, preached a religion of enlightened non-violence. Today I cry for those newcomers that then proceeded to bring 488 years of oppression, murder, and bloodshed to Turtle Island. And today I cry for their descendants sitting in a circle. I cry so they may find a way out of this. Today I cry, for I am looking for the way out of this. Today I cry, for none of you did any of that. But all of you and all of us, we have to work together to make it better. So that there will be no more tears. There will be future of beauty and balance. But you need rich, and I think you need a break. Let's do 10 minutes, and then Denyse will sing another song about some Indian act.
Yeah.
I wish they had done this, all the whole boat of those guys would have done go against the waves. The community here in Muskoka gave me the so to speak, native name Sings Like a Crow. So I commend all of you that you survived my singing. The thing is, I know and they enjoy the company and the supper. And now there comes Denyse with a heavy subject. So I will sit down and give her the word to start or continue our thing here.
I get to talk about the lovely Indian Act. Yay me. So I'll start off with a quote by John A. Macdonald from 1887. The great aim of our legislation has been to do away with the tribal system and assimilate the Indian people in all respects with the other inhabitants of this dominion as speedily as they are fit to change. So the Indian Act was passed by the Parliament of Canada under the provisions of Section 91(24) of the Constitution Act 1867, which provides Canada's federal government with exclusive authority to govern in relations to Indians and land reserved for Indians. So I'm going to read you the main 21 points. You guys do not want to hear me read the whole thing because it would put us all to sleep, as well as we don't have time. So some of the restrictions and impacts imposed on First Nations. Some have since been removed in revisions of the Act, but we'll start with the basics. So denied, women were denied status. And we'll explain that a little bit more later. Introduction to the residential schools. 3, reserves were created. 4, renaming of individuals with European names. So all of a sudden, you know, one of my great uncles is named Gasmoss, which in that case I kind of think maybe a new name would be great, but yes, they were renamed with European names. Restricted First Nations from leaving their reserves without permission from an Indian agent, and there are online, you can even see like these little passes that they used to have to get before they were allowed to leave. Enforced.
Couldn't just go to the doctor. There was no doctor on the reserve. So a woman in the doors of childbirth, there was no way she could get out to the hospital because she had no pass.
Yeah, it was like a school pass, hall pass, right? First Nations were restricted from leaving the reserve without permission. Oh, and I just read that one. Number 6, enforced enfranchisement of any First Nations admitted to university. 7,
that means if you are enfranchised, if you knew your name and you could write your name instead of 3 crosses, they decided that you are not Indian anymore, you are not Native American, you are not indigenous anymore, you become a Canadian citizen, which is great because you had the right, you know, to own land and everything, but you had no right to any of the help from the government, and any you were not allowed to be on the reserve anymore. And that is a big problem because the rest of the family was on the reserve.
Now, and the First Nations couldn't leave, but the government could take portions of the reserve for roads, railways, and other public works, as well as to move an entire reserve away from a municipality if deemed expedient. They could lease out uncultivated reserve lands to non-First Nations if the new leaseholder would use it for farming or pasture. First Nations were forbade from forming political organizations. They were prohibited from any First Nations or non-First Nations person from soliciting funds for First Nations legal claims without a special license from the Superintendent General. This 1927 amendment granted the government control over the ability of First Nations to pursue land claims. It was prohibited to sell alcohol to First Nations. It was prohibited to sell ammunition to First Nations because, Lord forbid, they were able to protect themselves.
So they couldn't go hunting either.
Right. They imposed the band council system, so that wasn't even, I mean, they still use that today, but that wasn't theirs. First Nations were forbidden from speaking their native language. They were forbidden from practicing their traditional religion/beliefs. They were forbade from Western First Nations from appearing in any public dance, show, exhibition, stampede, or pageant wearing regalia. And for anybody that doesn't know what regalia is, it is kind of what I'm wearing today. A lot of people would call it costumes. We do not have costumes, just like, you know, ministers and priests don't wear costumes. Their robes are sacred to them. It was declared illegal for them to do potlatch or other cultural ceremonies.
Do you guys know what potlatch is? It's a festival that the Western tribes have, when they put all their possessions in the middle, and then they say, you get this, you get that, and they give everything away. And then somebody else has a lot, and they put theirs in the middle, so that it gets all evenly distributed. But Western culture is very much into have. This is all mine. And so they did not want that the First Nations give away their things. And they thought that this was an act of communism.
It was a way of making an even playing field when it comes to possessions. Like even when somebody would shoot a moose, it was never, I take it back home. You know, the elderly and the people without a husband whose husband passed, everything was split equally. There are some tribes that also believe if I give you something, then that will be there. Like it'll be my riches when I you know, pass on. So the more that you gave away to somebody else, the richer you were when you met your Creator. And again, that's one, just Michelle and I were talking before, different tribes like different religions, although Anglican and Catholic are supposed to be kind of similar, they're very different in a lot of ways. A lot of the tribes are different. So sometimes Michelle will say something and she's talking about Siberian First Nation or, you know, I am really only versed in the Mohawk, Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe. So First Nations were, under the Indian Act, were denied the right to vote. There was a permit system created to control First Nations' ability to sell products from farms. And the last one is a piece of legislation created under British rule for the purpose of subjugating, thank you, one race. Major amendments were made to the Act in 1951 and 1985. In the 1951 amendments, the banning of dances and ceremonies and the pursuit of claims against the government were removed. In 1985, Bill C-31 was introduced, which I do not know enough about C-31. Now, again, that's something that we can all look up to. That is something else that, from the many relations I have and powwows we've been to, please look up some of this. You know, and I'm saying this from a kind and loving place, but First Nations, it's hard to constantly be teaching everybody about all these. It'd be great if you could look up some of this, educate yourself to a little bit, which is what you're all doing here to begin with. Because just learning all of this and learning on each bill, I mean, Michelle's done this for a lifetime. Michelle's not a lot older than me, but a little bit. And she's been doing this for years and years. I'm definitely a student. I'm still learning and learning all the bills and stuff. It takes years to go through it.
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, nobody here is a specialist in treaty rights. I am not. For the last 25 years or so, I have really strictly stick out of politics because I worked with the Kayeka-Haga Mohawk and also with Anishinaabe tribes and with the United Church and with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but staying out of the political things. There are people that are very, very good in treaty rights and they know everything. But that's not my strong point. My strong point is more in mentoring and, healthcare and healing and community outreach and, cross-cultural understanding. But somebody that has more knowledge about all the treaties and every little bit which amendment says which and who can do what from tomorrow morning on. And why can you not hunt on my property if you are not native, but why can Denyse come tomorrow morning with a bow and arrow and shoot all the butterflies in your garden? Because she is maybe part of Anishinaabe and maybe not, and who can and who can't. And there is so much that the two of us cannot teach you. You probably can find it in the internet, but it'll drown you out. It's that much to learn and to know. Yes?
There's a wonderful course at the University of Alberta that you can take online.
For free.
And you can take it for free. And they have a whole unit on treaties. And it's horrific. But that alone is 7 parts to that course. It's just the treaties. But it's a phenomenal course if anybody's interested.
I want to talk a little bit about enfranchisement. And why I'm reading this is so that this does not come across as crazy Michelle is telling you this, but it is the words of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It is the words of our native elders. And I am just a spokesperson who sits on this chair. So these are the official words. Prior to Bill C-31 amendment in 1985, enfranchisement resulted in an individual no longer being considered an Indian, we are supposed to now say indigenous, under federal government legislation. That, however, would mean this person would become a full-fledged Canadian citizen, but would lose any rights to ever step foot on a reserve and visit mom. So it split families apart completely. Indians, indigenous people who were enfranchised, were removed from their band lists before September 1951 or lost Indian status if enfranchised after September 51. Enfranchisement is a legal process for terminating a person's Indian status and conferring full Canadian citizenship. Enfranchisement was a key feature of the Canadian federal government's assimilation policies regarding Aboriginal people. Thou shalt not say Aboriginal. When they wrote this thing in '85, that was the word of the week that was used. Now, Native people all unanimously hate that word. So, teaching moment, don't say Aboriginal, even if you find it in old things like this, because Aboriginal means the First Nations of Australia. Today, the word of the week is indigenous, here in Canada. in the United States, indigenous is not very well looked upon. You say First Nations. Sometimes First Nation is also the word of the week. But some people in the States also like, again, the word Indian because it defines the conflict between their nation and the Belagani, the white people, Bazishu. So, if you go on vacation, say First Nation. If you stay home, indigenous is well received everywhere, I would say. And First Nations is also well received everywhere. So this act gave the Aboriginals the privilege of gaining full Canadian citizenship and assimilation into Canadian society. No one was asked, did you wanna get assimilated? Or maybe you were proud of being Lakota, Anishinaabe, Mohawk, and you did not want that. Of course, the people who wrote the darn thing, they thought that was the bee's knees. And some of them still think. But many First Nations do not want to have to get assimilated or be seen as assimilated. Many, I think the majority of the Kayekaraga Mohawk do not see themselves as Canadian. They are Mohawk. And Canada stops at the border of the rest. You are in another country. And many other First Nations also see it this way.
But the government made it that way. It wasn't like we did, like you guys are allowed to be Christians and Canadians. We had to make a choice. And so some of them are still back at that choice.
So, sorry, I just need to make sure I got this. So, an Indigenous individual is faced with the choice of either being Indigenous, living on a reserve, or living wherever they live, but being Indigenous, being recognized as Indigenous, so having status perhaps, as an Indigenous person of a particular tribe, and then being treated by the Indian Act as a
government ward.
As a government ward,
Yeah, as a
basically.
savage. Yeah.
Or, so you can either be a government ward and have status and have your indigenousness, or you can be enfranchised as a Canadian citizen, but then you're not Indigenous anymore.
That was the view before. Now, I think 1990 something, that changed. Now every child born to an Indigenous person is Indigenous and Canadian citizen, and has the right to vote. They had no right to vote, they had no right whatsoever. It's like you take a 14-year-old teenager into your house. They fight you with every right that they have, and you cannot force them.
Right.
Well, and the whole point when the Indian Act was that, you know, if you wanted to go to university, so it was kind of like, if you want this, then you've got to assimilate. So it was all kind of that bribing system. You know, we've got all this to offer you, but you need to leave that behind. You need to not. Now, of course, we can be both. But.
And the problem was that enfranchisement said that a woman, if she marries a non-native person, loses her status, meaning loses all the right to the government money. Every 2 years you can get $5 check if you are a member of 3D61. from the government, and I mean...
Yeah, this says it well. Under the statutes and policies of the Indian Act, a woman or women were not only discriminated against as Indians, but also as Indian women. Indian Act policies subjected generations of Indian women and their children to a legacy of discrimination when it first enacted in 1876 and continues to do so today. The federal law in the late 1800s that defined a status Indian solely on the basis of parental lineage. An Indian was a male Indian, the wife of a male Indian, or the child of a male Indian. So the man, if he married a white woman, they were all indigenous. But when a white woman, thus my line, and that's partly where my line fell, it was my, great-great-grandfather who married an Indian woman. So she lost all her status and there was no claim to that at all. So for whatever reason, it's only the man's bloodline that carries. Although it doesn't make even sense if you think of it that way because, whoever he married had no line. And she was only indigenous as long as she stayed married to him too. As soon as she did, if they left for whatever reason, then she was no longer considered.
Yeah, it was, to reduce the amount of First Nations individuals as fast as possible. Because at each First Nation individual every 2 years cost you $5. Or it was $4 until I think mid-90s or something, and now it's $5 every 2 years. So the natives were expensive. And then they wanted a school, and then they wanted something to eat, and they were not allowed to hunt. So you had to go in there and you had to feed them because where else would they be getting anything from? So you try to get as many native people enfranchised and out of the system as fast as possible. And that is, it left people no choice other than if you want to become a lawyer and fight this kerfuffle, you were not considered native anymore. If you survived residential school, you were not native anymore. And then you try to come home, you can't speak the language, you are not a band member, you are not getting initiated in any of the societies so that you learn your indigenous culture as an adult. You stood there and you had nothing.
And then you think of the parents that were left behind, their life was, I'll tell you right now, you want to take all my kids and take them away to whatnot, I mean, I'm done. So they came back. The children, even when they came back, most of them didn't have their culture anymore anyways because the parents were so messed up from having their kids taken away for no reason other than being indigenous, which is probably why my great-grandfather was so vicious about denying our indigenous culture because he was scared they were going to take away his children.
And children are still being taken away. I know, for example, a hereditary chief of Curve Lake that as a child has been sold for money to Germany. They wanted a little Indian boy that they wanted to raise. And I can't mention his name, but I'm pretty sure about half of you know him. And he's to be found on TV. Yeah. So the 60s grab, take kids as far away from the families, still then was in full swing to get, the First Nations to assimilate and kill culture. And every First Nation person that you meet survived through that. And that is quite a feat. So what do you have on Native women? I think that
Well, we kind of talked about, sorry, did you have a question? Yes.
I'm confused, not necessarily from this
Okay.
session, but
the situation with the indigenous communities and the Indian Act, is it, and my sense is some would say, just get rid of this stupid act. But again, within indigenous communities, there's maybe opposition to repealing the act. Can you say what the current status is in terms of
I don't
the
know if
Indian
it's
Act?
that they don't want it to end, it's just how do you do that? I mean, once you end the Indian Act, I mean, you gotta give them their land back, you gotta do, I don't know.
Some tribes, especially in BC, they leave this whole system and they go into a system of self-government. But for that you need money, because you have to take care of the people. This is like you become a small principality or a small country within Canada. But you have to take care of your infrastructure, of your hospital, of your schools, of everything that every other independent country has. Now in BC you can do that. And many First Nations tribes have the land mass to do it, have the education behind it to do it, you know, enough members of the tribe to represent and to build a government of an independent nation. But now look at a place like Ries Fjord, where there is nothing. And then there is some communities up north, they have been removed from where they were originally, and now they have been stuck in another place in order, this is where you build a village. But there's no food there, there is nothing there, there is no animals there to hunt, and you are not allowed to hunt because yet now it's not whale hunting season. So you have to starve, and if you're still alive in September, then you can go hunt a whale. But what are you gonna do up there?
And there's no trust that what the government's gonna offer this time is gonna be, one, truthful and honest, and any better than what they already gave us. So there's kind of that stalemate of, if we move forward, I mean, like the Oka crisis came out from, you know, they were allowed to take over properties if it helped the railroads and the water, you know, whatever. So they're trying so hard to hold on, I think, to what they have. Because is the government going to be truthful this time? It hasn't proven to in the past.
Yeah, I mean, the government sold a lot of land, and eventually the government got smart enough to put money into a trust fund. And I have this piece of paper over there, and there is a few dollars in there. That was, it's an old one from last year. The trust, because I don't know what you know about trust funds. I know a little bit about trust funds, but I think there's, it will take me a while to find this thing. But there's millions and millions and millions of dollars in there. That is the money the natives get every year in these budgets here. The government has the trust fund. Post-secondary education.
I'm just pulling up that song. We still want to do a little bit about the Strong Woman and Strong Woman song, or we've only got 15 minutes left, and I know that your prayer at the end takes a while. So.
Okay. Anyway, I can't find it right now, but this trust fund is what the First Nations, it's the money that is there for them. So the money is there to support, to pay for the settlers, Gagnon, to go up there, or give the tribe the money, and then they decide okay, we need a new power plant, but we also need a ping pong table for the community center, we need a whole bunch of new chairs, and we need an ambulance. So there comes the order that the ambulance and everything in 2 trucks are going to be put on the settler goes up there and delivers it.
It's still approved by the government on what they're allowed to want.
So many tribes nowadays can decide this is the money at all to them. What are they gonna do with it?
So to get out of that and become an independent country, I think it's very, very different. I don't think I'm the right person to answer this question because my knowledge in that area becomes more and more and more limited the further we go into that wasp nest. And I know it's there, and I'm not gonna stick my fingers any deeper into it.
I just didn't know if you could talk about the song still, the brief outline, or whether you're going to do your...
What time have we got?
We have
48.
Yeah, 8:48.
I mean, yeah, the status of women is the one thing that we have. What do you have? Anything on women?
We briefly talked about it
Yeah.
all. It's all the same thing. You know, male upon franchise was eligible to receive allotment of land, and the women were not. So it's all...
In the olden times, First Nations women were very powerful. Lot of tribes had a matriarchy. It was absolutely, totally, 100% inconceivable for the white settlers to have a matriarchy because the Christian belief until quite recently, and I hope it was a little bit longer ago than last week, Christian belief of old was that women are the weaker sex. Is there any women here that think they are the weaker sex? I think women kick butt. And women are more predestined to become evil than men. That was a Christian belief. So women had no say anymore as soon as the Canadian government came around. A beautiful woman raises desire in a priest and in a man. And these desires are evil. And nowadays, 2022 knowledge tells us that that's biology. Way back when, they thought that was the devil's work. So women were seen as evil. Women also can have more than one orgasm without everything falling over. That was seen as the devil's work. That's why you guys have a missionary position where it's most difficult to achieve those tricks. But we are not getting into that. So Denyse wants to do a strong woman song with you
before
guys.
we do that, just talking about, you know, the Christian, in the indigenous community, the women are life givers, and that was huge, right? You know, that's partly why I wear my skirt, you know, it's like the teepee, it connects to the ground, and the fact that I could give birth, which is something, you know, women could give birth that men can't, that, you know, it was a whole different society. Like even, you know, what they call our moon cycle, menstruation, whatever you want to call it, for a long time, it was dirty and disgusting, and that was kind of the, you know, I don't know if it's Christian or white or whatever you want to put it, but for the indigenous population, it was considered being in ceremony with the Creator. And I used to go to powwows, and there'd be signs, you know, if you're on your moon time, please don't, you know, participate. And I got so mad, and it was like, excuse me, there is nothing wrong with me. But it wasn't that. I was explained to me multiple times since then. When I am menstruating, I am in ceremony with the Creator. So if I'm in ceremony with the Creator and we're having a ceremony, I overtake, nice puck, somebody's saying, yay. I am overtaking the power from everybody else. I'm taking away from your ceremony with your Creator. So, you know, it's just a total role reversal. I mean, I grew up, my mom, you know, I didn't let my dad know that I had a cycle, and you know, if he did, oh my God, you know, it was dirty and disgusting, and hold your eyes. And the indigenous community, I took my kids to, you know, their first berry fest, and you know, the celebrations of becoming a woman. It was just so beautiful.
And the same thing with elders. I mean, when I was teaching on the powwow, where was
was that towards the Kayakahana? What was this little village? Anyway, it was an Anishinaabe powwow, and I was setting up my teaching tent. It's about 10 years ago. And the elders came by and said, "You're all dried up, right? Otherwise you can't teach." And I said, "Yes, I'm all dried up over a year and a day ago, because a year and a day after your last moon time, you are considered an elder and you can teach." So they wanted to make really sure, and they came by and they asked me. But women power, right? After that, you can teach.
How much time do you want for the closing prayer?
5-6 minutes.
Okay.
Something that is so different from the way I grew up was, or is, the fact that in indigenous culture, decisions were reached by consensus, and the person who communicated the decision was the woman. So in that sense, the women were much more highly regarded than they ever were in the culture I experienced growing up.
In some tribes, it was the women who actually told the men when it was time to go and hunt, and it was the women.
Speak up.
Oh, yes, I do that again. In some tribes, it's the women that actually would tell the men when it was time to go out and hunt. And in some tribes also, when a woman is on her moon time, she would actually get a holiday from everything else, the cooking and the cleaning and the whatnot, and she would have time to sit in an area where she could bead and work on her regalia and stuff. So many different ways of. So I guess the question for everybody right now: do you want to hear this strong woman song? We would go over by like 5 to 10 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
So I'll quickly give you the thing. So the Strong Woman song, according to oral history, originated with the Anishinaabe women who were held in solitary isolation. They would sing as a way to ask the Creator for the ability to continue on their journey no matter what challenges they might encounter. So it started in the prison for women in Kingston, Ontario during the 1970s. And it's just a really beautiful song. It's a different beat to drumming as it does, and I can't rub my tummy and pat my head. I just can't. Okay. So this will keep me on track. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, hey yo. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, hey yo. Way, hey ya, way, hi yo. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hi yo. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hi yo. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hi yo. If you know it, join in. Hey ya, way, hey ya, hey yo. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, hey yo. Way, hey ya, way, hi yo. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hi yo. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hi yo. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hi yo. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, hey yo. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, hey yo. Way, hey ya, way, hi yo. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hi yo. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hi yo. Way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hey ya, way, hi yo. And they would actually sing that in the Kingston Penitentiary when they were literally paraded naked past all the men and to the showers, and like the treatment that they had was horrendous. The women in prison, the indigenous women in prison, outnumbered the general population, yet the indigenous population is much smaller. And it's the same in the child welfare system. You know, it's known. But anyways, it's just a beautiful song. It just really touches my heart. And when I was at the healing lodges, it was one of the things that we would that we learned to sing and share together.
And beauty and balance. Today I'm giving thanks. I'm giving thanks to you all for having walked this heavy road together with us. For having listened, having given your input, and for taking home wisdom and knowledge. And today I pray that this knowledge shall go out into the wider community as a pathway to deeper understanding. And so I give thanks to the spirits of the East, the spirits of endurance and survival skills. It has served the First Nations well. Let us honor everyone that lived to teach us and to help us walk into the future. And I'm giving thanks to the spirits of the South, the spirits of teaching and learning, the spirits of love and family and togetherness. We are all one family of human beings. Today, we know that there is no difference. We all love. We all cry. We all grow. We all, hopefully, eventually become wise. May that be in our future. And in beauty and in balance, I'm giving thanks to the powers of the West, the powers of courage to walk away from all those things and all those old words that no longer serve us or the greater good of all. May we find the strength to walk a new path. West is the place of healing, of the healing waters given by great mystery. May healing come to all of those who suffer. May healing come also to all of those out in the community that cannot be here today. May healing come to all of those who are in sadness for having lost a loved one. May healing come to all of us every day of our lives. And in beauty and in balance, I'm calling and I'm giving thanks towards the spirits of the North, the spirits of the ancestors, yours, mine, ours. The spirits of wisdom, the medicines of dreams and trance. May those dreams of walking together, hand in hand, with all indigenous nations all over the world, be fulfilled for us. May Canada become a land that is able to guide other countries on this sometimes difficult road. You today sitting here are pioneers on that road. So the powers of North may be with you. Today I give thanks to Mother Earth for having provided us with a safe space, warm, cozy, lighting, so that we can all see and hear each other without fear and worry. Let us love our living Mother, the Earth, every day. Recognize that she is a being that lives in the sky, as we are beings that live on her broad back. And I'm giving thanks to Father Sky, to having clear roads in good weather so that all of you get home safe. And I'm sending greetings to Grandfather Sun, hoping that he shows his nose above the clouds tomorrow. And I'm sending greetings to Grandmother Moon, maybe we see her tomorrow. And I am giving thanks to Great Mystery. You people believe in the baby Jesus. If the baby Jesus is not only a legend, but is real, the baby Jesus too is a part of Great Mystery. If you feel that the words spoken here today were hard to hear, find your way back to that prayer on the mount, the prayer of enlightened non-violence, and move on your Christian path from there, because it is safe and fertile ground. And so in beauty and in balance, may you all walk. And in beauty and in balance, next week Tuesday, may we all be here. Ichimegwich, Shayanam, and thank you. There is a little native teaching when a shaman or a sachem plays. That's not a performance. That thing was real. Here you can clap, I don't mind, and neither does she. But in case you go somewhere on a reserve or something like this happens. Okay, end of teaching.